Hey. All right, so breakout, that just means I take questions, right? Okay, so I'm going to go right there.
Hi, Senators. I'm curious about Vladimir Putin. It seems to me like no matter what we do, he's always going to be against it. That Russia's always going to be our antagonist. Even when there are times when it seems like we should work together. Do you have any hope that anything can be done with Russia?
Yeah. So that's a tough one, and the answer is there are some things we can do together. We share intel to help each other deal with active terrorists. We do that, and we're doing that forever. In Syria, both the U.S. and Russia would hope that there might be stability in Syria, although we have very different views about how we would get there, who are good guys and who are bad guys. So, even if somebody's your adversary 90% of the time, dialogue is important because you can find areas of common cause, But the relationship is going to be very bad until we get all the facts out on the table about the cyber hack of the election. And I'm confident we will, because the Mueller investigation, unless he's fired, and I don't think he will, because I think that would be the end of the Trump presidency. The Mueller investigation plus Senate intel will get it all out on the table. And then that will be the low moment of the U.S.-Russia relationship. Look, we have a great relationship with Vietnam. Who would have predicted that? So we can't assume that the enemies of today will be the enemies of 5 years from now. You have to keep some space open for dialogue to enable a relationship to turn for a positive direction when the time is right. Yeah, please, right here. Yeah.
Hello, Senator. I'm from India, so this is like from the world's largest democracy to the world's oldest democracy, right? So we believe in democracy, you believe in democracy, but North Korea doesn't believe, the entire Middle East doesn't believe, half of Africa doesn't believe. So we know that this is an answer, right? But how do you convince China that democracy is the answer?
So that's a good question. You're not going to convince them by lecturing anybody. You got to convince them by living it and then making them or their people want it. And that's why I said, instead of telling everybody we're indispensable or we're exceptional, why don't we just try to be exemplary and then others will learn? So I think that's the first thing. And we're not necessarily, our example has been dinged up a little bit. And so we've got to do some things better to be truly exemplary. But the other thing I would say, apropos of the U.S.-India relationship, I'm the Democratic lead on the Foreign Relations Subcommittee that oversees the U.S.-India relationship. I think we have NATO, that's a military alliance. We have the OECD, that is advanced economies in U.S. and Europe, right? I think we need a global democracy alliance because there's democracies on every continent. More so than there were 40 years ago. India, South Africa, the U.S. We've got democracies on every continent. So why don't we try to create a global democracy alliance that is not about the military and treaties, military treaties, but that truly is about best practices in democracy, share best practices with each other, and try to be good examples, all of us. That organization doesn't really exist.
Just soft power.
And I think it would be a good one to exist, right?
What are your thoughts on the president and DACA, and what is your stance as a senator?
So I am very, very pro-DACA. I was a co-sponsor of the Senate Immigration Reform Bill in June of 2013. And just believe it's the right thing to do and the best thing for the economy and all of that. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think the president announcing, he obviously was very torn about it, and he had people in his team that were arguing both ways. He is very anti-immigrant in a million ways. Even legal immigration he would like to cut. But he does have a sympathy that I think is sincere for these dreamers. And he's got people around him, John Kelly, his chief, some of his family members who are really support dreamers. Then he has others who are super anti-dreamer and everybody else. So it's part a tug of war. So he sort of split the difference. We'll end the program in 6 months if Congress will fix it. I'm going to give you an optimistic prediction that's based on an underlying cynicism. I think we'll fix DACA. I think we'll fix it because I think the Republicans will decide, hey, wait a minute, if we fix DACA, we've been anti-immigrant, for the last 10 years, maybe longer. If we fix DACA right before the midterm election, then we'll say to everybody, see, now we're pro-immigrant. They won't do comprehensive immigration reform. They won't do anything else. DACA is really popular, so they'll do the thing that's really popular and then say, see, we're fine with new Americans. So I actually think we are going to fix DACA, and I'm going to vote for that because a permanent fix is so much better than the best executive order, because as you see, an executive order is too temporary. Please.
Senator, my name's Andrew. Your running mate last year was possibly the most qualified person who ever had as a major candidate, running against the least qualified person. And we all got to watch as she got pummeled and held to double standard and just creamed in the press, in the public. How do we fix the unequal representation of women in leadership roles when we see that women get treated like that by the media and unfortunately by the public as well? How do we fix it?
So did everybody hear the question on the other side? I completely believe this. Look, there are things about the campaign that were mistakes could be better. And there always are. Even winning campaigns, you can go back and find 5 things you should have done better. So there's that. There's all kinds of issues. People like celebrities. Donald Trump was a celebrity. People like outsiders who are not too Washington. And Hillary was seen as part of Washington, Trump wasn't. So there's other issues too. But I do believe a double standard about women is a key feature. You can't understand this election without understanding that. We know we haven't had a woman president. We know Hillary was qualified, and she lost. But if you were to say, well, let's just call that a coincidence. Well, no, I'm going to prove to you it's not a coincidence. What I just said out there. Why is the United States below the global average in the percentage of women who serve in our federal legislative body? Why are we worse than Iraq or Afghanistan or Morocco or other countries? We think we're so good at everything, and we are good at a lot of things about women. That's good. But electing women to federal office, we're really bad at it. And Hillary was the subject of so many double standards that betray a continuing challenge in really treating men and women equally, especially when it comes to allocation of power or responsibilities. So how do we break that down? Well, look, Hillary helped breaking it down by being nominated. She helped break it down by winning the popular vote. You know, it's gonna be the biggest mismatch between the popular vote and the electoral vote in the history of this country, I predict. I mean, it already is, but I think it will continue to be. So she's pushed it and made it a little bit easier. She's inspired so many people. Just to give you on the ground, Virginia is weird on elections. We have our state races in odd years, not even years. So our entire state house, 100 seats, is up this year, and governor, and lieutenant governor, and attorney general. So we're seeing 1 year after Trump in a critical battleground state what's going on. We have 2 years ago, last time the 100 seats were up, Democrats had 35 100, and we had 25 challengers, so we had 60 races. We left 40 seats uncovered. This year we have 88 out of 100 covered, only leaving 12 uncovered, and most of it is because of young women have just decided, I'm not on the sidelines. I don't care that they gerrymander my district, it's hard to win. I'm running anyway. And we're seeing young women candidates run. We're seeing turnout be incredibly strong. And we're going to do well in our statewide races, but the thing that I'm most interested in is who's turning out and who's running, and we're seeing a real uplift. Many states, maybe you live in states that have this, have something called Emerge, or a group like Emerge, whose goal is to encourage women to run and train them and make sure they do. And you know, there's a lot of research that I'm not savvy about, but people have described it to me. Guys will run even if they're not qualified because they think they're qualified. Women who are super qualified, and guys don't even need to be asked. They'll just like, no, I think I'm great. There's sort of a social psychologist, even super qualified women, they kind of need to be asked or encouraged because they look at it as 20%. Well, I guess I'm probably not going to be successful. But the Emerge chapters around the country are now doing a really good job of finding, training, encouraging, and supporting women candidates. And I think supporting a group like that here would be a good thing. Please. Did you have your hand up?
No, I did not.
Okay, then I'm going to come here.
There's a huge amount to be learned from the results of the election.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk and as we saw Brexit happen,
Yeah.
and we need to start the beginning. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned. But as a former teacher, I think about how those lessons should be taught in schools.
Right.
And what are the best lessons for young people who may aspire to be policy or leadership. What would you say are the best? How should schools teach what's just happening?
So how do we, in our education system, you know, educate great people who engage in civics to understand what happened? I will tell you, a similarity in the Brexit result and ours, there are many similarities. my read of the polls in Brexit, 2/3 of people under 30 voted to stay rather than to leave, and so the society made a choice to go a different direction than the young one, that's a trouble sign. Same thing in this race. Hillary would have won 49 out of 50 states if it had just been voters under age 35. And obviously everybody gets to vote, but when the nation is going a different direction than what the young think is the right direction, that poses a real disharmony going down the road. Because that can be incredibly demoralizing as a young, this leader of the new generation, like, well, wait, society's going a different direction. So how do you work on it? I'm on the committees I'm on in the Senate are Armed Services, Foreign Relations, Budget, and then it's called Health, Education, Labor, Pensions. And I'm on the Education Committee, and we're trying to grapple with topics like the young lady in the front row asked me about, the loss of blue-collar manufacturing jobs, so human capital issues, but also the whole sort of civics question. The federal government doesn't dictate curriculum. We put standards out there so that states can try to do it. And if we try to get too into micromanaging curriculum around things like social sciences or civics, we run into a real buzzsaw with governors and everybody else. But I would say one of the things we can do, I think middle school is like the lost part of our educational system. Elementary, get the basics. High school, start to make choices for college or career. Well, what's middle school about? I would make middle school heavily about civic responsibility and career exploration, so that when kids are in high school, they then have some base to start, making choices about. But that is a big, big topic. So right here.
Thank you. Thanks for framing, our American potential as something that can be self-critical and very progressive. I wanted to ask if you can foresee an American future where, in a positive sense, we actually restructure our democratic institutions or processes in a way that maybe we didn't think was very American, but might further our democracy.
So, yes, that's what the framers hoped we would do. It's interesting, if you look at amendments, so they realized they couldn't get the Constitution ratified unless they did the first 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights. And then we've done 17 amendments since 1791. Some of them big and really notable, although I would argue that the last really notable one, some of them are kind of technical, line of succession, things like that. I think the last really notable amendment to the Constitution was allowing 18-year-olds to vote. So we're now probably talking 50 years since there was a kind of a big amendment to the Constitution that was not a technical one. So they did intend that we should rethink and restructure, and people have written, well, okay, if we were going to rethink and restructure, what are the ways to do it? And it doesn't all have to be by Constitution. You can do some things. Look, we should do campaign finance reform, and even though the Supreme Court has knocked out some of the kinds of things we can do, there's a lot of things we can do that they would uphold, like nobody can give a penny to politics without it being publicly disclosed. Democrats support that, Republicans don't, but we could do that constitutionally. So I think the 1787 framers, they would be discouraged if they thought we felt like we just had to live with it and not contemplate major changes. That they were hoping that we would contemplate major changes.
Hi, Senator. Bouncing off of that question, I think about major changes that are sort of foundational, and also what you were talking about, the disparity between the Electoral College and the popular vote. Do you see the Electoral College evolving, going away? Like, what do you see as the remedy to that?
So everybody hear the question about the Electoral College. So to change the Constitution, as you know, you have to get a 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress, or 2/3 of states asking for a constitutional convention. And then you have to come up with what your proposed amendment is, and then it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. Very difficult. The Electoral College benefits small states. The Electoral College, when it was created, was to battle against Virginia, because Virginia had the most electoral votes. Virginia had 5 of the first 10 presidents, 2 of the first 10 vice presidents, and they were worried about getting swamped by Virginia. New York inherited the most populous state from Virginia in the 1820s, and California inherited it from New York in the 1950s. So there's only been 3 states in the history of our country that have had the most population, the most electoral votes. But now the small states really like it. So what would be the options to reform it, either constitutionally or statutorily? Constitutionally, I think the only thing that would ever shake us out of the small states and say, we're not going to change it, is we would need some good scholarship, but I think good scholarship might show the Electoral College was so tied to the institution of slavery. It wasn't just big state, small state. The crafting of the Electoral College was really tied to the institution of slavery. And I'm not a historian, but I think there's some evidence there for that. And if folks really dig into it and we come to understand, and I'm stating it as a research question, not as a conclusion, but we would come to understand that the Electoral College really wouldn't have ever been there if it weren't an attempt to kind of strike a compromise between the free states and the slave states. That might provide an impetus to re-examine it and make a constitutional change. Statutorily, there is a way to make a change, which is the electors in every state. The Constitution doesn't tell states how to assign their electors. So 48 states assigned by who wins the popular vote in the state. 2 states assigned by who wins the vote in each congressional district, and then they assign it that way, Maine and Nebraska. But a state could say, we will assign our electoral votes to the candidate that wins the national popular vote. About 25 states have actually passed resolutions that have said, as soon as at least 35 states join with us in this, we will assign our electoral votes to the candidate wins the national popular vote. And that would be completely constitutional, wouldn't take a constitutional change. But again, we're sort of stuck because the small states are like, well, wait, what's in that for me? So they're not seeing the virtue to it.
We got to wrap it up.
Okay, I'm going to go one more right here.
I'm just wondering, since we're talking about the Constitution, everybody here is dealing with technology and data. There is an argument to actually rewrite the Constitution.
Yeah, yeah.
And I wondered what your view was on that, because we've changed so much in 230 years, and we keep going back to this document that is really very much out of date,
right,
even from the first 5 words of the Constitution,
yeah,
since, all men.
Right. Well, we the people didn't mean all the people.
I
didn't
know.
mean all the
so
people.
that's
right.
why wouldn't it? I'm just wondering what your take is on it.
This might surprise you. In every session of Congress, 2-year session, usually there are about 200 bills introduced to amend the Constitution. Balanced budget amendment, to reverse popular election of senators, to change the Electoral College. So there will be 200 proposals admitted, and they almost always get killed coming out of committee. The committees don't support them. So there still is a mechanism, and there are members who are very interested in rewriting pieces of the Constitution. They introduce bills to do it. The other way to do it is for states to call a constitutional convention and to rewrite. But if the states call a constitutional convention, it's not to rewrite the Second Amendment. It's just open. It's just open, and anything that gets votes. And there's both a desire to do it and a little bit of fear that, well, if you have just a complete open constitutional convention, maybe they would even take the word regulated out of the Second Amendment. See, because right now the Second Amendment allows individual ownership, but at least says you can regulate it. You might get in there and they would take the word regulation out and there could be no regulation about it. So there's a lot of, the Constitutional Convention poses some upside, also poses some risk. And so I think more likely the way we would do it is just these individual amendments. And look, there'll be an individual amendment sometime that will catch momentum, just like the 18-year-old, women vote in 1919, 18-year-old vote in 1968, caught momentum first with some activists. People didn't think it was that important. Then started a Vietnam War push the 18-year-old amendment over because people were dying and they couldn't vote. So what will inspire us to say we've got to make that change? I'm going to a wedding, so I cannot take another question.
Oh, please, one more question.
Thank you all.